In the shadows of time, hidden away in the forgotten corners of ancient libraries and tucked within the forgotten scrolls of history, there are whispers of words once spoken by a man who changed the world, but whose true teachings have been lost, perhaps intentionally, perhaps through the neglect of those who came after him. The figure in question, of course, is Jesus of Nazareth, the Son of God. But what if the teachings we have today are not the full picture? What if there are pieces of wisdom, profound insights into human nature and the workings of the universe, that were never shared with the masses, deliberately hidden from the light of history? These lost teachings, if they truly exist, are said to carry within them the very essence of what it means to be human. They promise to unlock mysteries of life, prosperity, and fulfillment that go beyond the scope of traditional religion. These are teachings that speak not only to the soul but to the practicalities of living in a world full of chaos, greed, and doubt. Could they be the secret to leading a life of peace, power, and purpose in today's modern world? In this story, we embark on a journey through time and legend. We will explore ancient texts, long-lost fragments, and hidden messages that have surfaced over centuries, each offering tantalizing glimpses into the true nature of Christ's teachings. But what makes these teachings different from what we know today? What if they hold the key to a kind of wisdom that transcends organized religion and speaks directly to the heart of personal and professional success? Our journey begins with a discovery that could change everything we know about the life and teachings of Jesus Christ. For in this discovery lies a message that challenges the very foundation of how we see ourselves and the world around us. The tale begins in an ancient monastery, where a curious scholar named Elias, deep in the mountains of the Holy Land, uncovers a fragment of an ancient text buried beneath layers of dust and decay. The text is old, its edges worn and its ink faded, but as Elias studies the document, a shiver runs down his spine. The words are unmistakable, they are familiar, yet they are different, and what is even more unsettling is that these teachings resonate with truths he has always known in his heart but never been able to articulate. As Elias delves deeper into the hidden wisdom of the scrolls, he begins to unravel secrets that have remained buried for centuries. He learns of a message from Jesus that speaks not of piety or rituals, but of the heart of what it means to live a fulfilling and prosperous life, a life of service, wisdom, and boundless potential. But Elias is not alone in his quest for the lost teachings. There are others who have sought this knowledge, some for personal gain, others out of sheer curiosity. And as Elias gets closer to the truth, he realizes that the power of these teachings could be far more dangerous than he ever imagined. Who would benefit from these teachings? And who would stop at nothing to ensure they remain buried forever? Elias stood in the dimly lit chamber of the ancient monastery, his heart racing with anticipation. The parchment he held in his hands was frail, its edges curling with age, and the ink had long faded into a whisper of what it once was. Yet, as his eyes traced the faint words, he knew he was on the brink of something extraordinary, something that could unravel centuries of established belief. For years, Elias had searched for this very moment. His life had been dedicated to studying ancient texts, from scrolls hidden in remote caves to the most obscure writings locked away in forgotten libraries. Yet nothing had ever felt as significant as the discovery before him now. He had stumbled upon a fragment of a lost gospel, one that was not included in the Holy Scriptures, one that had been deliberately excluded from the Bible, a gospel, perhaps, that held the teachings Jesus never spoke aloud, or perhaps was silenced by others who feared the power these words could unleash. The room was quiet, save for the soft rustle of Elias turning the fragile pages. He couldn't help but wonder, why had these words been hidden for so long? What truths did they carry that had been deemed too dangerous for the world to know? The first lines he read were simple but profound. The kingdom of heaven is not above, nor is it below. It is within the heart of those who seek it. These words struck Elias like a lightning bolt. He had spent his entire life seeking answers in the heavens, in the stars, in the distant promises of a paradise beyond death. Yet, here, Jesus was telling him that the kingdom of heaven was not something distant or out of reach, it was within. Elias sat down, his mind racing. What did this mean? If heaven was within, then perhaps the answers to life, to fulfillment, and even to business were not found in external pursuits, but rather in the deep recesses of the human soul. The teachings of Jesus, as he understood them, had always been about salvation, love, and redemption, but this was something different. This was about self-realization and inner power. Elias continued reading. To seek the kingdom, one must first understand the nature of the soul, for the soul is the vessel through which all things are connected. The words echoed in his mind. The soul, the connection between all things. What if this was the hidden core of Jesus' teachings? What if the power to change the world, your world, was not about seeking salvation from an outside force, but about cultivating the power within yourself? Could it be that Jesus' message was not one of waiting for divine intervention, but one of activating the divine within? For hours, Elias lost himself in the text. The teachings that followed were even more cryptic, but they resonated with a truth that Elias could not deny. Each lesson, each line, seemed to peel back another layer of the mystery, revealing the very essence of life, love, and purpose, the path to true power. As Elias read further, the text began to reveal more about the true nature of power. It was not the power of kings or emperors, of those who ruled by fear or manipulation. No, this was a power of a different kind, a quiet, unshakable power that came from within. The powerful are those who serve, not those who dominate, for the greatest among you is the one who lays down their life for another, not the one who takes it from them. Elias pondered the implications of these words. The concept of power that Jesus taught was the exact opposite of what the world praised. In modern society, power was often seen as the ability to control, to influence, and to command others. But Jesus' teachings, as Elias now understood, turned this notion upside down. True power was not in commanding others, but in serving them. It was not about taking from others, but giving freely, without expectation. Could this be the key to success, not only in life but also in business? In a world driven by competition, where the strong often trample over the weak, could the path to true success lie in serving others? Elias thought of the great leaders he had studied, those who had inspired loyalty, love, and respect through acts of service, not by force. As he read on, another passage caught his eye. The one who seeks riches will find them fleeting, but the one who seeks wisdom will find riches that endure. These words struck a chord deep within Elias. In the modern world, wealth was often seen as the ultimate goal. But what if true wealth wasn't measured by material possessions or the size of one's bank account? What if the wealth Jesus spoke of was something much deeper: wisdom, compassion, and the ability to bring peace to oneself and to others? This passage was especially poignant for Elias, who had spent much of his life in search of knowledge. He had accumulated vast amounts of information, yet he had never felt truly rich. Was it possible that the wisdom Jesus spoke of was the key to a kind of wealth that could not be measured in money or possessions? As Elias continued to immerse himself in the scroll, it became clear to him that these teachings were not just spiritual. These were lessons for how to live a full, meaningful, and prosperous life in any time, in any place. They were teachings that spoke to the very heart of human existence. The more he read, the more he realized how deeply relevant they were to the modern world. A message for the modern world. The teachings Elias uncovered spoke of a reality that was timeless. Despite the differences in culture, technology, and society, these words remained relevant. They had the power to transform individuals and, by extension, the world itself. The key lay not in adopting a set of rituals or dogmas, but in embracing the fundamental truths about human nature and the universe. As Elias sat in the chamber, surrounded by the dust and silence of the monastery, he began to understand the message that Jesus had left behind. It was a message of empowerment. It was a call to each person to recognize their own inner power, to serve others, to seek wisdom above wealth, and to understand that the true kingdom of heaven was not some distant place, but a state of being that could be realized here on earth. Elias now faced a decision. He had uncovered the lost teachings of Jesus, but the question was, what would he do with them? Should he share them with the world, knowing the potential consequences? Or should he keep them hidden, protected from the forces that might seek to suppress them? The weight of this decision rested heavily on his shoulders, but Elias knew that the world was ready for these teachings. They were more than just words, they were a blueprint for a better life. And perhaps, just perhaps, it was time for the world to hear them once again. Elias had barely slept for days. The discovery in the monastery had consumed him, and as each hour passed, The weight of the teachings buried within those ancient scrolls pressed down on him more heavily. It was as though the words themselves were calling out to him, demanding to be understood, to be shared with the world. But Elias could not ignore the truth he had uncovered. The teachings contained a power so potent that it could transform the very fabric of society, and not everyone would be ready for such a change. His mind was a swirl of conflicting emotions. The teachings spoke of love, service, and sacrifice, but they also spoke of power, the kind of power that had the ability to bring about profound shifts in consciousness, in personal success, and in the way people lived their lives. Yet, in the same breath, these words called for humility, compassion, and the deep understanding of one's own soul. How could he reconcile the need for power with the call for selflessness? Elias turned to the scroll again, trying to make sense of the passage that had most perplexed him. It had become clear that the power Jesus referred to was not the power of domination or control, but the power of love. This was the radical nature of the lost teachings: power through service, through humility, through wisdom. It was a power that did not seek to overpower others but to elevate them. The next passage Elias read began to untangle the knot in his mind. To love is to understand. To understand is to see the divine in all. Those who truly love do not seek to possess, but to empower. For in the act of empowering others, you become empowered. This insight was revolutionary. Elias had always been taught that love was the greatest virtue, but it was often framed in terms of sacrifice, self-sacrifice, giving without expecting anything in return. But here, Jesus was teaching something deeper. True love wasn't about losing yourself for others, it was about helping others find their own power. By empowering those around you, you empower yourself. Love, in this sense, was a dynamic force that created mutual growth and strength. Elias closed his eyes and pondered the significance of these words. The act of loving was no longer one of weakness, but of strength. It was a conscious choice to give people the tools to succeed, to help them unlock their potential. In a world so focused on competition and individual achievement, this was a radical departure from everything Elias had learned. It felt more like a secret, a quiet truth that few had been able to see. But the implications were far-reaching. If people embraced these teachings, if they loved with the intention of empowering others, then the entire fabric of society could change. Competition would no longer be a race to the top, but a shared journey toward mutual success. If everyone believed in the divine potential within themselves and others, would we not create a world of peace and prosperity? The struggle for understanding. Days turned into weeks, and Elias remained holed up in the monastery, consumed by the teachings and their implications. He had made the decision to share the wisdom, but the question remained, how? How could he spread such a powerful message without the world either rejecting it or, worse, using it for personal gain? These teachings were not just spiritual guidelines, they were a blueprint for how to live in harmony with the world. And yet, Elias could not help but wonder if the very forces that had suppressed this knowledge for centuries would rise up again to keep it buried. Elias knew the risks. History had shown that powerful ideas, especially those that threatened established structures, were often silenced. The early Christians had been persecuted for their beliefs. Socrates had been sentenced to death for his philosophy. Could this be the fate that awaited him and the teachings he was now carrying? There was a gnawing fear that perhaps sharing these teachings would lead to his own downfall. But there was also a deep calling, one that he could not ignore. Fear not the wrath of men, for those who seek the truth shall be free. Another passage in the scroll read, it was as though the words themselves were urging him forward. The path would not be easy. Elias knew that, but the truth must be known. The world was crying out for a new way to live, and these teachings could be the answer. One evening, as Elias sat by the fire, contemplating his next steps, a figure appeared in the doorway of his chamber, a shadow against the flickering light. The figure moved silently toward him. Elias had no need to look up to know who it was. He had been expecting her. Anastasia, Elias said softly, acknowledging the presence of the woman who had been his closest confidant and fellow scholar. You're here earlier than usual. Anastasia was a woman of sharp intellect and unwavering curiosity. She had accompanied Elias on many of his journeys, seeking lost texts and exploring forgotten ruins. But what Elias admired most about her was her ability to see the world not as it was, but as it could be. She had always believed in the potential for transformation, for something greater, and she had long been a believer in the untapped wisdom that could be found in ancient teachings. "I've been thinking," Anastasia said as she sat beside him. "You've found something extraordinary, haven't you?" Elias looked into her eyes, and for a moment, he saw the same flicker of recognition that had burned in his heart when he first read the scrolls. She too understood the gravity of what they had discovered. "It's more than extraordinary," Elias whispered. "It's revolutionary. The teachings, they are unlike anything we've ever known. They have the power to change everything, to change us, but I fear what will happen if I reveal them." Anastasia remained silent for a moment, her gaze fixed on the fire. Then, she spoke with quiet conviction. "I understand your hesitation, Elias, but isn't that the point of these teachings? To show us that true power lies not in fear, but in action? We have been given this knowledge for a reason, and if we keep it to ourselves, then we are no better than those who buried it in the first place." Her words hit Elias like a bolt of lightning. It was as though a veil had been lifted from his eyes. What Anastasia was saying was true. The teachings weren't meant to be kept hidden, buried beneath layers of secrecy and fear. They were meant to be shared, to be lived. Elias stood up, determination flooding through him. "You're right," he said, his voice growing stronger. "I can't keep this to myself. The world needs to hear these words. It's time for us to lead the way. Blank, underscore, blank. The awakening. The decision was made. Elias and Anastasia set out together to bring the lost teachings into the light. They knew that the path ahead would be fraught with challenges, but they also knew that the message they carried had the potential to heal, to transform, and to awaken the world to a new reality. They traveled from town to town, village to village, sharing the teachings with anyone who would listen. At first, the reactions were mixed. Some people listened with skepticism, others with curiosity. But as Elias and Anastasia spoke of love as empowerment, of wisdom as true wealth, and of the kingdom of heaven as a state of being rather than a distant promise, the message began to take root. Word spread quickly, and soon, people from all walks of life were coming to hear the words that had been hidden for so long. Business leaders, spiritual seekers, and everyday people, all were drawn to the profound simplicity of the teachings. And as more people embraced the message, the world began to shift. People began to see one another not as competitors, but as collaborators. The focus of society slowly began to change from individual gain to collective growth. As the teachings of Elias and Anastasia began to spread, the world began to change in subtle yet profound ways. At first, the shifts were barely noticeable, small acts of kindness here, moments of understanding there. But as more and more people embraced the philosophy of love as empowerment and wisdom as true wealth, the transformation became undeniable. Elias watched in awe as individuals, families, and entire communities began to align with the principles they had shared. What had once been a fragmented, competitive world began to pulse with a new energy, a sense of unity, purpose, and collective growth. People were no longer focused solely on accumulating material wealth or climbing social ladders. Instead, they were beginning to understand that true fulfillment came from empowering others, from recognizing the divine spark within each person and lifting them up. Business leaders who had once been driven purely by profit began to incorporate service into their practices. Corporations turned from being greedy, self-serving entities to becoming forces of good, investing in their communities, creating sustainable practices, and ensuring that their success benefited not just a few, but the many. In schools and universities, educators focused less on competition and more on collaboration, teaching students the value of empathy and shared knowledge. Families began to understand that their true wealth was not measured in possessions but in the relationships they nurtured and the love they shared. Even governments, at least in some corners of the world, began to reconsider their approach to power. Leaders who embraced these teachings led not with fear and manipulation, but with wisdom and humility. They understood that true leadership was not about control, but about serving the needs of the people, empowering them to live fuller, more prosperous lives. As these changes rippled through society, Elias and Anastasia continued their journey. They traveled far and wide, always learning, always growing, always sharing. They encountered resistance, of course. There were those who feared change, those who clung to the old ways of power and greed, but the overwhelming response was one of gratitude, of people who felt seen, heard, and understood for the first time in their lives. And in turn, they began to live with purpose and compassion. But it was not just the world that was changing. Elias and Anastasia were changing too. With each town they visited, with each person they encountered, they came to understand the depth of the teachings they had uncovered. They had once seen themselves as mere messengers, but they now understood that they were also living examples of what was possible when one embraced the truth of love, service, and wisdom. One evening, as they sat by a campfire on the outskirts of a village, Elias turned to Anastasia, a quiet smile on his face. They had just shared their message with a group of farmers who had been struggling to make ends meet. The farmers were now working together to pool their resources, to share knowledge, and to support one another in ways they had never done before. "Do you ever wonder," Elias said softly, "how far this can go? How many more people will hear these teachings? Will it be enough to shift the course of history?" Anastasia looked into the fire, her eyes thoughtful. "I believe it's already happening. We don't need to change the world all at once. We just need to keep planting the seeds. The rest will grow in time." Elias nodded, his heart swelling with both hope and gratitude. They had set out to share something sacred, something powerful, but they had learned that the teachings were not just for others, they were for them as well. In empowering others, they had also empowered themselves. And in the process, they had discovered the very essence of what it meant to be truly alive, to love without limits, to give without expectation, and to serve without hesitation. As the night sky stretched out above them, filled with stars, Elias felt a deep sense of peace. He realized that the teachings of Jesus, though lost for centuries, had never truly disappeared. They had simply been waiting for the right time to be rediscovered. And now, in their hands, in the hearts of those who had embraced them, the wisdom was alive again. It was no longer a secret, it was a living, breathing force that could change the world for the better. And so, Elias and Anastasia continued their journey, not as saviors or prophets, but as humble messengers of a timeless truth. They knew the road ahead would not always be easy, and that many obstacles would stand in their way, but they also knew that the power of love, wisdom, and service was a force that could not be stopped, not by time, not by fear, and certainly not by those who would seek to silence the truth. For the kingdom of heaven, as Jesus had taught, was not a place to be found. It was a state of being, here, in this moment, within each of us, and as long as people were willing to seek it within their own hearts, the world would continue to awaken. In the end, the greatest lesson of all was simple yet profound. True power lies not in what we take, but in what we give.